My name is Susie Snyder, and I'm going to talk to you about Don't Bank on the Bomb. It's a project that's run by PAX, a Dutch organization, and ICANN. The purpose of the project is to draw attention to the private sector's involvement in the production of nuclear weapons and the financing behind that production. Because nuclear weapons cannot be made without money, and most people are surprised to learn that it's not just government money that goes into making nuclear bombs. In fact, there's quite a lot of private sector money that comes from banks, pension funds, and insurance companies and other investors. Don't Bank on the Bomb provides detailed analysis of the companies involved in the nuclear weapon industry and the investors behind them. Before I get into those details, let me talk a little bit about the world's nuclear arsenals. Most of the nuclear weapons in the world are held by the US and Russia, and the number of nuclear weapons in the world that are usable are starting to go up. It's a reverse of the trend that we've seen for decades, and it's a bit scary and something that we should be concerned about. Overall, in 2021, the 9 nuclear-armed states spent $82.4 billion on their nuclear weapons. That's an inflation-adjusted increase of $6.5 billion from the previous year. Overall, it's $156,000 per minute, or about 20 million yen per minute, on weapons designed to cause catastrophic, indiscriminate harm. Those numbers can be difficult to imagine, so let me put it into perspective. That amount spent on nuclear weapons per minute could provide health care for 50,000 children. 1 minute of nuclear weapons spending could pay the salaries of 2 elementary school teachers. 1 minute of nuclear weapons spending could provide 18 public housing units for a year. These amounts are overwhelming, and when we talk about nuclear weapons and the risks that they pose, we need to also talk about the diversion of resources away from real security needs. Let's look at the country-by-country spending. The US spends the most. In fact, they spent twice as much as all other nuclear-armed states combined, spending $44.2 billion on their nuclear arsenal in 2021. China spends $11.7 billion, Russia $8.6, and North Korea spends only $642 million on its nuclear arsenal. But it's not governments alone that earn money to make nuclear weapons. In fact, private companies involved in the production of nuclear arsenals and their key components received over $30 billion in contracts in 2021 alone. That's 35% of total global nuclear weapons spending that went into the hands of private contractors. Private companies are less accountable than governments. Companies that have a record of delivering on their contracts late and significantly over budget. And when I look at the contracts, it's amazing how often I see a contract is agreed and announced for one amount, and then days, sometimes even hours later, a modification is issued, and that amount doubles or even triples. Private companies have a motive to keep nuclear weapons around. It's to keep getting those contracts. And so they lobby so that they can earn more contracts. They also finance think tanks to make sure that reports about nuclear weapons often call for more bombs and less disarmament. Several of the companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons are familiar to us. Companies like Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and Raytheon, we know they build weapons. Their job is to make tools that kill. Northrop Grumman is one of the bigger contractors for nuclear weapons. They're designing a whole new system of intercontinental ballistic missiles for the US. It's called Sentinel. What's weird is that these weapons are meant to replace the Minuteman III system. But BAE Systems just got $1 billion contract, billions of dollars, to extend the life of the Minuteman system. So BAE is making money to extend the life of a Minuteman system, and Northrop Grumman is making money to replace that same system. They're both taking resources away from other key needs. But did you know Boeing and Airbus are also complicit in making nuclear weapons? They don't just make airplanes. Half of Boeing's overall annual turnover is related to the production of weapons. And Airbus makes key components for the French nuclear arsenal. One thing to keep in mind is that these companies don't make nuclear bombs as one whole piece. Instead, they build specifically designed components that are then assembled into bombs by yet another company. For example, the Trident D5 missile is currently circling the globe on US and UK submarines. There are thousands of these bombs. Each one is about 8 times more deadly than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Lockheed Martin is involved in missile production and deployed systems support. Charles Stark Draper Laboratory makes the Strategic Guidance Navigation System. Aerojet Rocketdyne makes the Boost Propulsion System. And Northrop Grumman does the launcher subsystem hardware and is also involved in the joint venture that puts the whole thing together. To be able to bid on contracts, to keep the cash flowing, these companies that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons rely on private financing. Last year, investors made $746 billion, or 99.7 trillion yen, available to the nuclear weapon industry. That means banks, pension funds, asset managers, and so on lent money or held stocks or bond in the main 24 companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons. And they do those investments to make more money because the weapons producers say they'll generate positive returns and give them something back for their investment. The biggest investors are in the US, with Vanguard and State Street topping the pack. And they hold lots of funds, mutual funds, electronic traded funds, and so on for a lot of big investors. But let me talk about Japan. We found more than 6 trillion yen invested by Japanese investors in the nuclear weapon producing companies. And that's your money. From pension funds or banks, 6 trillion yen being used to support the companies that build nuclear bombs. But who are those companies? Who are those investors? Well, their names you might be familiar with. Mizuho Financial, Mitsubishi UFJ Financial, SMBC Group, and surprisingly, the Japan Mutual Aid Association of Public School Teachers has significant investment in the companies involved in producing nuclear weapons. But also, the National Pension Fund is highly invested. And all of these investors want to see their investments make money. So that means that they will not be supportive of efforts for nuclear disarmament, for efforts of nuclear abolition. The National Pension Fund's investments show that government claims to support a nuclear weapon-free world are not very strong, and that there is a clear and vested interest to keep nuclear weapons around. But more and more investors are applying sustainable investment policies, and they are explicitly excluding nuclear weapon producers. The Dutch National Civil Servants Pension, ABP, for example, cited the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as the reason to stop investing in companies building nuclear bombs. And when the TPNW went into effect, Belgian bank KBC issued a press release saying that even though Belgium hadn't signed the treaty, the bank was going to make sure that it didn't have any regulatory or reputational risk. They were divesting completely from the nuclear weapon industry. Similarly, in Switzerland, when the Swiss parliament instructed the country to sign and ratify the TPNW, the National Conglomerate of Pension Funds, Publica, said that it was taking its $19 billion out of nuclear weapon producers. And there are more leaders in this area. In fact, taking money out of the nuclear weapons industry has had an impact on companies directly. Since the TPNW went into force, 2 companies are no longer involved in the production of nuclear weapons, ACOM and Serco. Serco even said that they would not bid on any new nuclear weapon contracts because it put them on the exclusion list of too many investors. We know there are at least 101 financial institutions that explicitly exclude nuclear weapon producers. Not all of them are perfect, but they all strengthen the global norm against nuclear weapons. And it means that at least $14 trillion is kept out of the nuclear weapon industry. And 59 of those investors have airtight policies that will prevent any type of investment in any company involved in nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. Nuclear weapons are a bad investment. The companies that build them can and do change, and we all have the power to tell our banks not to invest in nuclear weapons and to show their support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.